Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Southern Outdoorsman Podcast. Got a lot to discuss this week. We're hitting some listener Q&As towards the end of this show. If you want to skip ahead to those, you can go to the show notes and you can find the timestamps and go ahead to those Q&As if that's what's grabbing your attention about this podcast. But in the meantime, we're going to talk about Jacob Leishen's episode as well as an encounter with our target buck at the club. So got a lot to talk about. Jacob, what did you think of the episode?
Oh, it was awesome. I mean, part one, part two, there's so many good information. I think we're going to have a lot of listener success stories come from it. But just because one thing about Jacob that I found interesting is just like how he does what he does in North Carolina, which y'all kind of heard in the episode, kind of his hunting and scouting tactics, especially in season, and how he'll apply that to everywhere he goes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, plug and play, as he gets to different habitat and stuff, it changes a little bit. Like, you ask him, what does security cover look like? And he's like, it really depends on like what state he's in and what kind of habitat they're hunting.
Yeah.
But he does the exact same thing everywhere he goes, which I'm like, that's cool.
Yeah, that was impressive. That probably stuck out to me the most. And knowing him for a couple years now and getting to hang out with him some, you can tell he's a very, I think, disciplined individual, and he's very analytical about what he does. Like, he runs his own business. I mean, and that takes like a certain level of, a certain mindset to do that kind of thing. And I can almost see that like in his hunting, where he's like, this is my process. This is what I do here. This is what I do there. And then I do this, and then I do that. And like, man, he's got it down to a T. And that was really interesting, because I'm like, man, you really thought about this.
Yeah.
I mean, like, not like me, like spaghetti brain. Like, I'm just like, oh, I don't know what to do. Like, deer, Jacob is like, no, I got a process.
Yeah.
And that was very impressive to me. And I feel like he did a really good job of taking stuff that maybe a lot of people hit on over the years who we've talked to, and he implements a lot of different tactics. But he explained it in a really cohesive way that I feel like was really good.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that, and, another thing that I found interesting is like, how especially, in North Carolina, he's got cameras out, okay? And he talked about that. But when he, like, travels other places and he's using the same strategy, he's not implementing trail cameras. So when he's talking about hunting, like, a specific deer, some people may not have picked this up, depending on how intently they were listening. But he's not using trail cameras to find a specific deer. He's finding a specific sign to find what he is assuming is a specific deer, and then hunting that sign.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, the first time he sees the deer, he's either getting a shot opportunity or he gets observation on it, and then he makes a final move to try to get the deer killed.
Yep.
And I'm like, that's awesome. I mean, it kind of goes back to kind of Travis Murray. Kind of looking back at Travis Murray's episode, I think it's 210 and 212. When, like, he got out, Travis used to use trail cameras a whole bunch down in Mississippi, killed a ton of big deer. Completely honest, I think in the Southeast, he probably has the more big bucks killed than anybody we've ever interviewed. But he got out of using trail cameras just because, for whatever reason, he wasn't having fun with it anymore.
Yeah.
But he would still find specific sign that he thought a specific deer was in the area and hunting that sign. And a lot of times the first time he saw it was when he had a shot opportunity.
Yeah.
And I was like, there's a lot of similarities between like what Jacob's kind of doing, his mindset, compared to like what Travis is doing as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and also another thing is just the decisiveness. I feel like he kind of relayed, like, he seems very decisive about like what he's looking for and then what he's going to do after the fact, which is something that I know that you and me both struggle with, especially on out of state trips, where you're not sure if what you found is the best thing. And I really like what he said about you have to compare it against whatever you're seeing on that trip. That's kind of one thing that bit us in Georgia a little bit, I think, is we went there, and what did we talk about in that whole podcast and in the video that's about to drop?
Yep.
Or actually, by the time this comes out, it will have already dropped. Our Georgia hunt live on our YouTube, so go check it out. Oh, you got ESPN notification. Let's go. That's one thing that bit us there, because that whole podcast, you can go back and listen to it. All we talked about was this sign is so crazy compared to what we're used to.
Yeah.
And we weren't really judging the sign against what we were seeing in Georgia as much as we were seeing it against the sign that we see
in
Alabama and other places that we hunt. And so I feel like we kind of had a warped view of what was really good sign and what wasn't. And basically ended up just hunting a different place every single day.
Yeah, instead of like kind of buckling down. It seems like Jacob, he doesn't do that. He's not bouncing around like, when he's scouting, he is, but like when he finds a spot, he's just kind of honing in on that area and slowly makes his moves throughout that area.
Yeah. Picks it apart.
Which is, again, complete opposite of what we did in Georgia, specifically.
Yep.
Complete opposite.
Yep.
So, I mean, that is something that, again, kind of going back to the Georgia trip, if we would probably implement that, especially on that one ridge system that, you and me found a lot of the feed sign, a lot of buck sign, scrapes, rubs, and everything. If we would have kind of kept pushing the envelope in that area,
Mm-hmm.
probably could have had more opportunities than if you were like, didn't see anything on this hunt. Oh, let's bounce to this next area
Yeah.
and bounce to this next area.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, like a guy like Jacob's just kind of fascinating because it's just so plug and play for him. Like,
Yeah.
no matter where he's at, whether he's in, North Dakota, South Dakota, Illinois, Wisconsin, North Carolina, Alabama.
Alabama.
He's hunted Alabama a couple times. Does the exact same thing no matter where he goes, and it seems to work for him really, really well. And that's one reason why I think we're going to have more listener success stories from an episode like this, just because it's something it really is kind of plug and play. And he kind of mentioned, I was real curious because he talked a lot about like, if you had like 4 or 5 days hunt or 6 days of hunt,
Mm-hmm.
how he goes about, his regiment. And I kind of asked him, well, like, how does a guy that hunts only on the weekends implement this?
Yeah.
And he kind of gave examples of like what he's done in North Carolina, where like, maybe he gets off work early Friday, and he can stay out Friday, or maybe he just has Saturday, Sunday. He'll scout pretty much all day Sunday, maybe find a spot to sit Sunday afternoon or Saturday afternoon, all day Saturday, scout all day Saturday, maybe find a spot to sit Saturday afternoon. If not, he definitely will have something in his, based off what he's finding, somewhere to sit for Sunday.
Yep.
And I'm like, if listeners have that opportunity where they can hunt Saturday and Sunday and implement that, I think we'll just have a lot more success stories because of that, and
Yeah.
not just hunt the spot that like was great 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Because of how things have changed. You're trying to find the best thing at that point. And be able to apply, implement it, and hopefully kill a good buck.
Yeah. Sounds like what we need to do in Arkansas.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
If you're leaving for Arkansas, immediately following this podcast.
Yep, and that yeah, for sure. Because like when we scouted Arkansas a couple weeks ago, we found a lot of really good sign. Like sign was really really good, great rubs, great scrapes, the whole 9 yards, and it really kind of opened my eyes to where the sign was in relation to like hunting pressure. Because there's like we had talked about it. I think we might have
Mm-hmm.
mentioned in the last episode, um, that or one of these last breakdown episodes, that the pressure in some of these areas is a lot higher than what I'd seen the previous year.
Yeah, man. When we were going over on X like 2 or 3 days ago,
Mhm.
and you were like, "Yeah, there's a stand here, 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 here,
Mhm.
here," and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, dude!"
Mhm.
Like there was way more stands in there than I thought there was, but it makes sense because we're getting nothing but nighttime stuff there.
Yeah, except for one camera.
One camera's got some good stuff.
One camera's got some daylight.
Skirting around the edge.
Yeah, daylight. Mature buck moving on it.
Yeah.
But it makes me wonder, based off that hunting pressure and how those guys are hunting it, because that place still has the best sign, hands down.
Yeah.
Like absolutely hands down from everything that we'd looked at. So it's not like I would completely bounce from that area because of the hunting pressure, but kind of like what Jacobs talked about, getting in some of those really hard to get locations. Most of these guys that are hunting, they're hunting very obvious spots that,
Mhm.
some you can see on a map, some when you walk in, they're like, of course someone's going to have a ladder stand here.
Yes.
Or hang a climber and, cable lock it to a tree. But you start finding some of those more, I guess, once you find the hunting pressure where all those people are at, you can kind of see the area that you presume, whether you've scouted it or not, there's probably less pressure there. And that's probably where a buck can move or bed or, again, just travel during daylight hours and not get seen. And then also setting up, and we talked about this for opening day, setting up for specifically that hunting pressure kind of downwind of a lot of that hunting pressure.
Yep.
So that, more than likely, a lot of these guys are going to be bumping, especially does and probably some bucks too, and be able to set up in some of that thick cover and those thick transitions,
Mm-hmm.
400 or 500 yards away from them. Where,
Yeah.
if a deer gets bumped, he's probably going to go into some of that cover in the does too. So you're kind of setting up, really banking on that hunting pressure coming in and kind of try to capitalize on that hunting pressure to kind of help you out.
Yeah, I'm kind of excited about that because that can in the rut especially. I mean, that can really end up being good. It's like you're kind of kicking the nest a little bit
Mhm.
and getting them all running all over the place. That can really aggravate some movement, get them going. So
Well, it goes back to like Wes Mowey's episode. I think it's episode like 178 or 179 with Wes Mowey, talking about hunting like a wolf pack.
yep,
You're using those other hunters and their pressure as that wolf pack movement.
yes,
We're like, okay, hey, I know for certain there are guys in this big quadrant that are hunting.
mm-hmm.
Well, let's shift over to the quadrant and just adjacent to them, just downwind of them, or just crosswind to them, and see if we can get some deer movement kind of going that
Where's
direction.
Where's that thicket downwind of those guys?
Yeah.
Let's get on the edge of that thing.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah, it's gonna be fun, dude. I'm excited. We're gonna talk a lot about Arkansas. I'm sure we're gonna record a podcast or two while we're in camp. Just kind of going over everything. But yeah, you're gonna head out today, go run some cameras that we got out there, and then I'm gonna go down in a couple days. You're gonna have a good time. It's gonna be fun. Outside of that, a little bit of ground to cover with the hunting club. Kind of get people updated on what's going on there. So, an interesting weekend out there for sure. We ended up going out to the club actually because we were going to hunt somewhere else this weekend, but we had that podcast with Jacob that we really didn't want to miss. So we decided, hey, let's just hunt close to the house. I was like, well, let's just go out to the club. And I was trying to get you to bring your dang bow because I know you're wanting to go on doe patrol. And you were like, no, I'll just film. So I was like, okay. Even though I wanted 3 people with bows out there. I told you that we would get on some bucks. And that morning hunt rolled around. And so if people haven't listened in the past, there's a big 10 point on the club that we're hunting. Big, nice buck. And he's got a couple other bucks running with him. There's a couple nice 8 points. There's a big 6 point that Jacob really likes. And we've been kind of running cameras around where this deer lives, and actually pulled all the cameras to go put him in Arkansas.
Yep.
So I haven't had him on camera in quite a while now. But based on where I got him on camera last year, I got him on camera one time last year, and where I got him on camera this summer, I'm pretty sure I know where he's living and where he's bedding. And also there's a guy that's also in the club who's also an adjacent landowner named Cody. And he's been sharing some information with me. He's chasing the same deer, and me and him have been swapping some information back and forth, which, Cody, if you're listening, I appreciate you, man. He's been sharing some photos and stuff, which actually ties into this story. And so based on all that, I'm like, I think I know where this deer's living, or at least one of the places that he likes to bed.
Yeah.
And so for the Saturday morning hunt, I'm like, I don't really want to go in there because I don't think we could get in there and do any good. I think we'll bump him or chase him in there. He might be getting in late, or I just don't know. This just seems like more of an afternoon spot to me.
Yeah.
So I just kind of threw a dart at the board, and we hunted a random spot Saturday morning. It was terrible. And then Mike, he came out that morning with us as well. And Mike, we're still trying to get Mike his first deer.
Now, again, when we say Mike, it's not Michael Pike.
Not Michael Pike. Mike Dillon.
Yeah,
my stepdad. We're trying to get him his first deer, so he's been bow hunting hard. He's been getting after it and really hunting hard, trying to get his first deer. And my plan for the afternoon, I was like, this morning, everyone just go try to kill a doe, like just go hunt wherever. But this afternoon, like we're gonna go in here and we're gonna really try to kill this deer. And I will mention as well that going into this spot, last week it was like really cold. We had a big cold front, first frost of the year. It was awesome. And now we're on the backswing of that. And so it's warm again. And it was like 78 degrees that afternoon. So not like a great day of hunting as most people would put it. But I'm like, I think we're close to the bedding. I think he's in there. So we're just going to go. We're just going to do it. So we set up that afternoon. And one of the reasons I wanted you to bring your bow and hunt is because there's basically how the terrain sets up and the habitat. There's basically 3 ways that I think that he exits this area. Really, there's like 5, but there's 3 main ones that I think he's exiting. And I wanted to basically just put one of us on each of those. And you were like, no, I'm just going to film. I don't want to shoot one of your bucks. I'm like, whatever. So you came with me and filmed. Should have sent you with Mike. I sent Mike to a spot where when that cold front rolled through, I don't know if we talked about this already.
No, not really.
Okay, so when that cold front rolled through, it came in on a Monday, and I knocked off work a little bit early, and I went out at like 4 o'clock or something and the club's 5 minutes from the house, so that's why I joined it. It's so close. And I went out there on the front end of that cold front. It was real windy, but I was like, I just want to hunt. Like, it's cold. This thing, you never know what'll happen. And I went to a spot that me and you found when we were actually scouting turkeys. And we walked down through this bedding area, and we found basically a really nice deer trail coming out of it that comes around a terrain feature and has a bunch of oaks around it.
Yeah.
And it just looked really good. I was like, man, we should come back in here. Haven't been back in there since. I've been around it since, but I haven't been back in there since that. So Monday, I'm like, I'm just going to dive in there for an afternoon hunt. And it just took me longer to get in there than I thought. I don't think I was climbing the tree until like 5 o'clock, which this is before the time change. So I still had a little bit of daylight left at that point. But as I was making my way in there, it was like, boom, rub, 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 rub. I get to that particular spot where all those oaks are and that trail's coming out. and I look around, and there's just rubs kind of all over the place, like whip rub here, snapped off over there, good rub over here, like the size of my forearm. And so this club has a complete lack of buck sign on it.
Yeah, it
Like,
does.
I never find buck sign on this club.
Yep.
I don't know why. But when I found that, I was like, this is as good as I've ever seen on the club. Like, they're obviously coming through here. And I didn't know if it was just one buck or if they're still bachelored up. Actually, the thought of them being bachelored up did not even cross my mind at all, because I'm like, it's freaking November 4th.
That comes to the story, guys.
So I found that spot, and I'm like, this is the spot. This is the kill spot.
Yep.
So I sent Mike there. When I walked into that spot on that Monday, there was already a doe standing in that spot, and I bumped her off, and the wind was iffy. I probably shouldn't have even went in there, but I'm glad that I did and kind of pushed the envelope a little bit. So I get out of there, and I just kind of keep it in the back of my mind. I'm like, we need to get in there ASAP to, strike while the iron's hot. So I put Mike, we get on Onyx. I drop the pin for him. We draw his route. And I'm like, hey, you need to walk this way. I think you drew the exact route. Like, you were like, hey, walk in this way and then cut up and walk straight to the tree, and showed him how to access it. And so we sent Mike to that spot, and me and you went to a different spot it's another spot I haven't been to yet, but I've had cameras. Essentially, it's a habitat break. So it's where one thickness of pine meets another thickness of pine. So like unthinned pines meet thin pines, basically. And it's really, really thick right there. And it also falls on an interesting terrain feature. So I wanted to go to that spot because I've had bucks on camera on both sides of it. So like 100 yards on each side of it, there's trail crossings, and I've had them on camera in both of those in daylight. So I'm like, they're spending some time in there for sure. So I want to dive in and check out that little terrain feature. So that's what me and you did, kind of an experimental sit. We get in there, and we ended up finding some whip rubs pretty much right off the bat. Some pretty nice ones too. There was one about the size of our thumb that was ripped off.
Yeah, but it's like subtle because it was. I think a couple of them were maybe a little bit fresher, but a lot of them were like right when the velvet came off. It looked like,
yeah,
because like you really had to look. You're like, because like the one I saw that was broken off, the one you're talking about. At first, I was like, we were standing there like at that transition, and I just happened to look down. I'm like, that sapling looks a little funky because it was it was broke off probably probably 6 inches off the ground, something like that. And I kept looking at it. I'm like, that sucker's broke off because the top was laying there.
Oh, yeah.
But there's no leaves on it because, again, it was early and all the leaves had fallen off already. But I'm like, there's deer coming through. But also, one thing you mentioned in Jacob's episode when he was talking about, like, the leaves and, like, like the crunchy, or, like, I think, was that with Jacob?
No, that was with Jamie.
That was well, that comes up next.
That comes out
soon. But anyways, like the whole leaf aspect, like we got in there and there was a trail a little bit lower down when we were kind of working up into the spot.
Pretty good trail.
But we get up there and it was just kind of like meandering.
Yes.
Like the trail system was kind of meandering. Like it wasn't like a hard line trail, but you like get in a spot and all of a sudden like the leaves were going from like being real loud and lofty to like they were kind of like broken up.
Yeah.
And like kind of like in like an area kind of moving out. Like, okay, well, there's definitely deer walking through here.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something that y'all will hear in an episode coming out soon.
Yeah.
Because we discussed that with a future guest, and we actually talked about that scenario where it's so dry. There's some hickories dropping their leaves in there, and those hickory leaves are just like sitting like this high off the ground. They're just like real dry, real crunchy, and so it was loud as crap going in there.
Yep.
But you got to that spot and it got quieter, and they were all kind of crushed.
Little woodsmanship. What did we do to kind of cover up our sound as we were walking in?
Listen, I was putting that sweet little hen yelp out there.
That little yacht.
I put that yacht on them. Y'all go check out the yacht podcast live.
The
now.
yacht show.
Best intro in the game. Oh my gosh, man, he's hilarious. Anyways, so yeah, we were walking in. I was scratching a little bit and just doing a little hen yelp, and that helps a lot, man.
But give us a hen yelp to give listeners.
That crap works.
Natural voice.
So just like that.
I can't gobble, but gobble out.
Yeah. So just walking in, doing that every once in a while, and that puts them at ease because thankfully turkeys walk around on two legs like we do.
Yep.
So you can sound just like a turkey.
And they make a lot of noise.
Yeah. And I'll be danged if we weren't halfway up the tree and a big old gobbler came up in there, son. I was like,
we hear something walking and you're like, what is that? I'm like, because I was hanging I was like 3 sticks high, And all of a sudden, I like look down, and he's like coming just right down below us at like.
I mean, swinging beard. Too.
Yeah, it just, and I was like, oh my god, because like at first, like, is that a deer? And I'm like, oh my god, it's a turkey. It's a big gobbler. I'm like, drop a pin on him because we're coming back in the springtime.
Oh yeah, dude. He had one of them beards that goes out and kind of bulbs out at the
Yeah,
bottom.
yeah.
Oh,
But he big old body turkey, dude. Like,
oh yeah.
like
Old butterball.
he'd eat good.
Oh, he did good. Yeah.
So
Yeah, called up a turkey. That made me feel good. But one thing we noticed right when we got in the stand is everything, like the woods, just seemed like kind of alive. You know, that morning was like very quiet, kind of slow. Like the squirrels weren't even moving. When we got to this spot, man, there were like 85 squirrels just having a great time.
Squirrels, birds, everything. Like
the woods were just alive.
Yeah, which is kind of interesting. Like you hear other people talk about that. Like you get in a spot and like for whatever reason, it's like everything's awake and active.
Mm-hmm.
And by God, the deer were too.
Yeah. Yes, they were. So basically, to cut to the chase, Mike ended up having an encounter. So he went and got in that spot. He got in the exact tree that I told him to get in. He got in the same tree that I got in last time, and it's a good tree to get in because it's a white oak. It's pretty big. It's really comfortable for a saddle, perfect for a climber, and you have, I think it's a maple right next to you to your left, which is where the deer come from. And this maple is like very bushy and thick, and you could just barely see through it in some spots. I mean, you got to like kind of look through there to see through it. But I was telling Mike, I'm like, you're going to hear them coming because it's going to be really loud. But also, you can just kind of watch over there and just see if you can catch any movement. And if something's coming, you're going to be able to catch enough bits and pieces to know what it is. You know, if it's a nice buck or a doe or whatever. And you can move as much as you want behind this thing. Like, they're not going to see you. And by the time they pop out, they're going to be 15 yards broadside. And you should already be at full draw. So Mike, he went and hunted that spot. And at 5:30, which is a good hour before dark, a good hour before shooting light ends, he hears something, and lo and behold, here comes a bachelor group of bucks right down the hill.
Yep.
Right down where all the whip rubs are, where these white oaks are dropping. There's some sparkleberry right there. It's real rocky.
He had the encounter I've been dreaming of. Oh, my God.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah,
like, quote-unquote early season, because this is super far from the rut. This place isn't right till like January.
Yeah.
And to have a batch group of bucks come through like that.
Oh, yeah, dude.
Like,
yeah.
Oh, my God.
So it was...
and like, 2 or 3 shooters in the group.
Yeah.
You know?
Three shooters in the group. So, yeah, Mike's trying to get his first deer. That's why I put him in the spot. I mean, I thought some deer would be coming through there. I did not expect the bachelor group that we had on camera all summer to be coming through there. Same bucks.
And to give a little backstory as well, like, we've talked to Mike, like, whatever is legal, shoot it. Like, for your first year, like, get some experience. So, spike, doe,
whatever.
Doe fawn, big giant buck, whatever.
Yeah,
and just by happen, 3 of the biggest bucks on the property.
Yes.
And 2 small bucks come walking by at 25 yards.
Yeah.
Maybe?
So the lead buck was the Big Ten.
Yeah.
So he came out first, which is kind of interesting. It was the Big Ten. It was an 8-point we've had on camera.
Mm-hmm.
The Big 6 we've had on camera, and then 2 spikes. So they came out in that order, and they were feeding around Mike. The Big Ten got to about 25 yards, and it's still like light outside. He was like these bucks were like standing there like looking into the sunlight, like the sunlight's beaming off of them. I'm like, oh, I wish I was there. That sounds awesome. Should have sent Jacob with Mike with the camera equipment. And he was just feeding under those oaks and in amongst that sparkleberry. And Mike took a crack at him and smoked a limb. Which, okay, so Mike texts me. We're in the stand. Mike texts me. He's like, just shot at a buck. I think I hit him. And I was like, oh my gosh. So we called him. And basically he said when he shot, he heard like a loud whack. He's like, I don't know if that means I hit him or not. Because Mike hasn't, he's never shot a deer with a bow yet.
But he said it didn't sound like it hit the dirt.
Yeah, because he's missed a couple deer this year.
Yeah.
And he's like, it didn't sound like it hit the dirt.
Yeah.
And I was like, but it was like a loud whack. And he's like, yeah. I'm like, you might have got him. Like, I thought he hit the deer.
Yeah.
Because he was standing in like all these rocks. There was a whole bunch of rocks around him, and it is extremely rocky in there. And I was like, if you missed and hit a rock, it would have been a very distinct sound.
It's like a 22 going off.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been like a very loud, sharp sound. And he's like, no, it was like a whack. And so I was like, well, he either hit a limb or the deer. And I'm hoping he hit the deer. And after we get off the phone with him, we have a couple does walk in on us. They came down that bigger trail that we were set up basically right on top of. And this doe kind of fooled us a little bit. She's lucky. She's lucky she had like this fur on her ears or whatever. So she's walking in, and she had like a little white streak of fur like on the outside of her ear,
No, well, I think it was the outside.
or it
Outside
was
in,
right on the edge of the ear.
yeah, but like when she's walking in, I'm like, I see the deer coming, and I'm like,
I'm
because
like,
I can see him really good when they're coming in, and I'm like, oh, it's a spike.
I
Like,
thought the same thing.
because you're trying to get it, your bow. And I didn't know it was a doe. Like, I could see her probably 30 yards maybe,
Yeah.
and I couldn't see. I couldn't tell it was a doe until she's like 15 yards, and I'm like, it's a doe. It's not a spike. It's a doe. And I'm filming her. And like, see, I was on one side of the tree. You're on the other side of the tree. And on my side of the tree, I felt pretty exposed because I'm like, I can see them plain as day. Like, there's not a whole bunch of stuff in the way. And I'm like, just filming. I'm like, dude, if she looks up here, she's going to be like, what the heck is Oliver Anthony doing up in that tree?
He's like, hey, I love your song.
Yeah. And anyway, but she never did. But it was kind of a cluster because again we're still game trying to shoot a doe too, man.
Oh, I was gonna smoke that doe.
And
yeah, I was trying to get turned around, so I'm like flipping around because she's on my weak side, and there's two of them, and I see the first one coming, and she was kind of a smaller doe too, and she was coming to us, and I saw the same thing you saw. I'm like, oh, it's a spike. And then like 3 seconds later, you're like, it's a spike. It's a spike. I was like, crap. But then the other doe was swinging right through one of my lanes, and it was one of the lanes that I didn't have to like completely go up under my tether and like turn around to shoot. It was one that I could just swing and shoot off my offside. So I switched to do that, and the lead doe, who is at this point is like 12 yards away, she smells something. I think she smelled something. I don't think she saw us, but she smelled something. And she kind of stopped, and she's like looking around, and then at that point, that's when we realized she's a doe, and she's like stopped behind this big limb. But I've got a hole in that big like leaf cover. I've got a hole like about that big, a little bigger than a dinner plate, right on the kill spot. I mean, like perfect right there. And I feel very comfortable taking that shot. And so I'm like, crap, because now I'm like, I could draw and take the shot, but the problem is I'm just like leaned back a little bit too far, where in order to like get up, where I can shoot through that hole, I would have to basically like lean up, and I didn't feel like I'd be very stable, even though it's like 12 yards, because I've already had a bad experience with the deflection this year.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I'm not going to risk it. I'm going to just see if she moves a little bit, or if this. I needed the other one to take like 2 steps, and she would have been wide open at 20 yards, and I would have felt very comfortable.
Well, this is a good lesson for listeners, a good learning lesson. So Andrew's talking about we're talking about these deer coming in on Andrew's weak side. So they're coming from his right side as a bow hunter. And when you were spinning around, like when we first thought it was a doe or a spike, I thought you had already spun around where you had your tether, had your back up against the tree with the tether coming across the top so you could shoot it. So I thought you were good because I never looked back at you the whole time. I was just just fixated on the deer and filming the deer. And that's a good lesson for everybody. Like if you're hunting specifically in a saddle, or I mean a lock on too. I mean you spin around, but if you're hunting in a saddle and you have deer coming in, whether you're trying to shoot a doe or, to be honest, even if you're not quite sure you want to shoot a doe, maybe try to shoot a buck, but a doe, like you see a deer coming in and it's on your weak side, as soon as you can, you should spin around and get prepared for it in case there's a buck behind them or in case you want to shoot that doe. So you're not trying to do it when we were trying to do it she was at 12 yards and you're trying to spin. And funny enough, like when you were like moving around, like you were moving around a good bit, and she never looked up at us.
No,
like never once looked up at us. She kept looking like further up the hill.
I completely spun my entire body around, and she never looked at us.
Yeah, and I was like, huh. I'm like, we're about to get busted. We're about to get busted. We're about to get busted. And she just like never looked our way yet that close.
Yeah.
And but long story short, they kind of eased off. They didn't really like bust or anything. Like she kept smelling something. We had a squirrel come like hopping by us, and she never looked at the squirrel. She kept looking like on the ridge.
She kept looking up the ridge. I'm like, is something about to come off this ridge?
Yeah,
because we could hear stuff up there. I'm like, maybe a buck's about to come down.
Oh, that would have been crazy.
Oh, yeah.
But anyway, so she kind of like after a while, started getting. We were losing light and losing light and losing light and losing light. I think that whole encounter, I looked at the footage, was like 36 minutes long.
Yeah.
And finally, it kind of like dropped down the ridge. But one thing we didn't mention, we actually, so they dropped down the ridge and kind of dropped down below us, or dropped down the hill below us. And we kept hearing other deer walking around. Like they kind of go across the other side. And we then, now it's at legal light, and you can start hearing deer walking
Yep.
just down below us. I'm like, dude, it's like everything came out.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh yeah.
like everything was there.
Yeah, there was a lot of deer in there. I feel really good about that spot going in, especially going into the rut. I think that's gonna be an awesome, awesome area.
Yeah.
You could sit the creek and shoot one crossing the creek for sure.
Yeah.
Because that creek is like very straight, and the creek is like most of it is like ankle deep on a person, but there's little shoals in it. There's little spots where the water just kind of runs over the rocks, and it's just like not even ankle deep.
Yeah.
And the deer like to cross on those. And there's one straightaway right below where we were, where man, there's like 3 of those shoals in a row, and you're downwind of a food plot too, and it's a good spot. So I think that might be something we end up doing in rifle season, is just sitting on the creek and just you can catch one either running on either side of the creek paralleling it, or possibly crossing the creek on one of those shoals.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's pretty neat little area. So yeah, that didn't work out. Ended up just kind of letting them go. Like there was a few instances where I could have forced a shot, but I'm just like,
No, I was thinking, I'm like, don't force anything. Because first
No.
off, we had to do Jacob's episode in like an hour and a half.
and we had a potential, track job and everything with Mike too at this point. So I'm
Yeah.
like, I'm only gonna shoot this doe if she's like just makes it way easy.
Yeah.
Because they kind of turned around and started to run off a little bit. And they ran like 10 yards and then stopped again.
And they came back.
and then came back.
Yeah.
And when they started coming back, I'm like, oh babe, you're about to get it.
Yeah.
And then they didn't come quite close enough. They went through some lanes, but at that point it was dark enough where I'm like, I don't remember if that lane was wide open or not.
Yeah, because that's one thing you'll realize too, especially, well, morning or evenings, like right at first light or right, when you're getting down the last 5-10 minutes of legal light, it's like, when it gets darker, it looks like it's more open than what it is.
Yeah.
And you don't realize there's like twigs and branches and small branches and saplings and stuff like in the way. So you're like, oh man, that's like a wide open shot. And then you shoot and your arrow like hits one something and goes, dunk! Yeah, just like goes to the stratosphere.
Yeah. So they went through a couple. There was one lane that I knew for a fact was wide open, and there was a big pine tree right at the back of it. And I just needed them to walk in front of that pine tree. And it was like 25 yards wide open. And both of them walked right behind it. And I was like, all right, this ain't happening. So we just kind of let them go.
Well, after that, we pretty much bounced, went to the truck, met up with Mike.
Yeah.
Walked in. We were talking to him. We're all excited. Like, we're filming everything. Like, we're like, dude.
We're out there filming recovery.
Yeah, I'm like, Mike hopefully made a pretty good shot. Mike's been practicing a whole bunch with his bow. And one thing about where Michael's at, it's kind of a higher stem count right there. And he's like, I could shoot up underneath it. Like, I can shoot like right to the deer. And we get over there and kind of like get up on that spot, and it was kind of funny because we get there and I'm like, because he couldn't find blood, because he walked up there, couldn't find his arrow, couldn't find blood. And
oh yeah, that was another thing. When he said he couldn't find the arrow, I'm like, that arrow's in the deer, because he's shooting a big giant rage. And I'm like, he didn't get it passed through. It's in the deer. So I'm like, I'm feeling real good at that point.
Well, we get up and I'm like, oh, there's blood right there.
Oh,
and we're like all of we're all like jumped up anxiety and
I ran up there,
we
like a little kid.
ran up there, and it was like just a couple yards in front of us. We saw it with the light.
And I got an adrenaline dump when you said that. When we were out there, you're like, "There's blood." I was like,
Yeah.
I was like, oh my
And we
gosh.
walked up and it was like a maple leaf or something that had like some red heat, like
Freaking rookie.
splotches on it.
What
And
an
dude,
amateur.
but oh man, it looked like it from this.
Total
I was too
amateur.
I was too worked up. Nah, dude, I'll tell you another thing. When you shoot a deer and you're like, say you're in like a clear cut or like a fallow field or something, and there's like that I don't know if it's that big blue stem or whatever, but it has like that red hue on like the
Yeah, it's tough.
dude, you'll like you shoot a deer and you start walking by. Is that blood? Is that blood? Because it's got like red on the like some of the lower leaves of that grass, and then
Yeah.
on the stalks, kind of like reddish color.
Yeah.
And dude, it
Get
will,
you every time.
It will mess you up so bad.
Get you every time.
Like, is that button? You start rubbing on it, it doesn't come off. Like, oh crap.
So we go in there with your just insane flashlight. It's like unleashing the sun. It's so bright.
6,500 lumens.
Yeah, that is the blood trailing light right there.
Yep.
And we go up, find where the buck was standing, see where it kicked out. You found a maple leaf that looked like blood. And then I'm like, okay, you guys just stay right here where the buck was and just kind of like comb the ground, like look for subtle stuff, see if you can find hair. I'm going to do a loop around you in the direction he went and just see if I pick up anything. And I get like 4 steps away, and I'm like, oh, there's the arrow. And yeah, clean as a whistle.
Yeah.
And it's kind of out of desperation. I'm like looking real close at the arrow, like, is there anything on it? I'm smelling it. Nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing. And then I look at the broadhead, and the broadhead has got like tree bark in it.
Yeah.
and it was just laying on the ground. It wasn't like buried in the ground or anything. It was just laying on top of the leaves. And I was like, yeah, you definitely hit a limb. That's what that smack was. It deflected. It was like 5 feet to the right of where the buck was standing.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, yeah, you definitely just got a deflection. So bummer, but man, Mike was so fired up about seeing those. The next day he texted me. He was like, that was so awesome. I'm
Yeah.
like, dude, I'm just glad you got to see him.
That's the first time he's seen a rack buck out of the
That's the
stand.
first time he's ever seen a rack buck out of the stand, and I think that was the biggest buck he's ever seen.
Yeah.
So like, dude, that got me like. That's why I put him there, dude, because I wanted him to have an experience like that. So that was
Well, I go back to a story. I told him this too because I've had, I think, all bow hunters, I mean, even gun hunters have had like heartbreak stories of like the ones that got away.
oh yeah.
And I had one on a piece of public that's like the biggest deer I've ever, well, one of the biggest deer I ever like had to be able to get drawn back on a bow or drawn back on my bow. And it was coming in similar situation where like it was coming out of like an older clear cut, like probably like 6-year-old pines, coming down an SMZ, coming down to the creek, and I was like at that function where like where this SMZ went up off the creek, and I was sitting down there next to the creek, and there was a real good sign down there.
Yep.
And dude, that buck came in, awesome big 8-point, comes down, and I'm like I can like see his steps come, like I see his legs coming, and like hear him just like slow walking. And I'm sitting I was using a lock-on at the time. When it was a Lone Wolf Alpha lock-on. So I was like 8 feet off the ground maybe because there's real small trees I was in down by that creek. And it comes in, dude, and and it's like wide open. Like it's like a big tunnel underneath all the canopy, wide open like 35 yards. And he steps right into it, and it's like getting down like that lower light where like you can still see the deer real good, but like you get like 5, 6, 8 minutes left to shoot.
Yeah.
And he stops right behind a sapling that is not bigger than like maybe a quarter in diameter, and it's right behind the crease of his shoulder. I'm like, all I have to do is not hit that limb, or not hit that sapling, and he's dead. And I draw back and I hold just a couple inches behind that sapling to the left of that sapling. I draw back and I let it fly, and I'm telling you, you could not have center punched that sapling better. I couldn't have done it if I tried, okay? And I center punched it. I hit it. It deflects under there, and I had a lighted knock. And you see this like green lighted knock go out and goes ding, and it goes under there and skips back up and like just goes up into a tree. And that buck, he like bounds off 30, 40 yards and like just stands there. And then like just stood there all the way till it got dark, and then he just started slow walking down the creek. Oh, and I'm like, are you kidding me, man? Yeah. Like, oh my God.
Brutal.
Yeah. So
happens to the best of us.
Yeah.
So the good news is, one, I don't think that deer knew what actually happened.
Oh no, he thought a squirrel was throwing sticks or something at him.
Yeah. Mike said they all ran around the side of the hill, but I think he said one of the spikes stopped and just stood there and like looked around for a while. So I don't think they actually knew what happened. So I'm not really concerned about him like blowing them out of the area. I think that bedding area is so secure compared to at least how people hunt our property and how people are hunting neighboring properties. I think he's so secure right there. I think he uses it a lot. And that bachelor group too. I think, I didn't know they were still together, but that's the same bachelor group we were getting on camera this summer. Yeah. And they're still together right now. This happened, I think, on November 4th, I think. Yeah. 4th or 5th. So that goes to show, like, if you're in the rut right now, as this episode drops, like, we're a pretty good ways out from the rut. We're still bachelored up here in November. And I was talking to Cody. I told Cody, I'm like, hey, man, stepdad missed that 10 tonight.
Yep.
And he's got, like I said, he hunts a couple of adjoining properties. And he got pictures of that same bachelor group. It was the 10, the 6, and those other deer at 7:30. So 2 hours later. And it's kind of weird. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, 2 hours later.
Oh.
And then again at midnight on his place.
Wow.
Yeah, interesting. We'll have to look at the map and check that out.
Huh.
Because the direction that they went, I was surprised that they ended up on his property. But anyways, so that was really good to know. The other good news, and this is what I told Mike, I'm like, sucks you missed him. Awesome encounter. We're not even close to the best part of the season yet. And the fact that now we have this, again, like this data point, we have this information that they are using this. They're using it how we thought they would. And just the overall number of bucks in there. I don't know how much they're going to disperse or whatever, but we have some stuff already set up to hunt in this area where when rifle season comes in, I'm extremely confident that we're going to get a crack at one of these deer.
Yeah.
Very confident. Because we kind of did our homework last year and haven't scouted it overly hard, honestly, but just how I think they're going to move through there, and this confirmed it because of to get to where he went, he had to go through some very specific terrain features that we have set up to hunt that our access is money. I hunted as many times as you want, so I'm feeling really good about gun season. So, yeah, it was a good hunt, man.
Yeah,
It was a good hunt.
for sure,
So
for sure. Well, real quick, we got a few minutes left. Let's get over to some listener Q&As. So appreciate everybody been submitting new Q&As. Again, you can go down the link down in the show notes or on this video podcast and submit your questions for us to kind of answer on these outro breakdown episodes. And dude, we've had some really good ones come in. It's been pretty exciting kind of seeing all the different ones popping up, but also we appreciate everybody's been submitting these listener success stories. I mean, I think there was one day. I mean, we're getting multiple a day, but like I think there was one day we had 8 or 9 come in one day. Just like you guys are just killing awesome deer. Whether it's your first day, the first deer you've killed in many years, your biggest buck, your best buck, first bow buck, whatever. And really appreciate those listener success stories coming in. So again, you can click down the show notes below as well and submit your listener success story there. So just appreciate that. It's awesome kind of seeing you guys going out implementing a lot of these things that these guests have talked about, and actually having really really good success doing so. So it's been awesome kind of see that. But
yeah, absolutely. All right, we got a couple here. This is from Isaac Ellison. He's a listener success from last year actually, and he's the struggle bus on Apple.
okay.
So our Apple podcast reviewers. Old Struggle Bus coming in. He said, "Hey guys, I'm hanging as a tree as I type this, and I have to come into this spot blind this morning. And I've turkey hunted this WMA in the past, and I've walked past the spot a few times in the spring. But now I'm hunting it with little time, and I have to what little time I have due to work and being a dad. I'm taking every opportunity I can to get it being in the woods. So my question is, if I took you to a random southern WMA hill country / rolling hills, and you only had one day to hunt it and only a morning and evening to get it done and to kill a deer, what terrain features / habitat are you going to hunt? And you can use Onyx to e-scout, but no boots on the ground scouting ahead of time. And to make it interesting, let's do bow hunting first, and then let's talk about a rifle spot. And I know what Andrew is going to say about a rifle spot. So no gas lines or power lines or WMA food plots. And for time of year, let's do mid-October bow hunt, and then you have one more day during the rut later in the season with a rifle. I hope this isn't too confusing. I know that going in blind can be difficult, and I know scouting boots on the ground is key, but for the circumstances I'm in this morning, I was just hanging in the saddle and was curious what you guys would do in this situation. I hope both of y'all smack a giant this year, and I hope it only takes Andrew one shot. And make sure Jacob only has one shell in his rifle so he can only shoot cough cough one buck. y'all stay safe. Struggle bus out.
Yeah.
All right. That's good, man. That's good stuff. I'm gonna take this one first.
Yeah.
If I had one day to bow hunt on just a random hill country WMA, I think I'm focusing on compounding habitat features first. If it's more gentle rolling hills, I think I'm gonna focus more on that. If it's a little bit rougher rolling hills, I might try to get like a terrain feature in relation to it. But first and foremost, some kind of habitat edge. Similar to actually what me and you hunted with those does, kind of almost relates to what you're talking about because I hadn't been in there before. I've been around it a little bit, but I hadn't been in there before. And the reason I went to that spot is because it was like hardwoods and then pines like hit those hardwoods. There was a unthin pines on one side, thin pines on the other side. So one set of pines was pretty open. One set of pines was extremely thick, and those came to an edge. And then that line, that hard edge, ran straight into the hardwood SMC.
Yep.
So you had like a 3-way intersection of habitat types right there. And that's always a really good spot to start. And also, if you got one spot morning and evening, I would actually scout in the morning and hunt midday and evening. If you're just going in blind. Jacob will probably be different on that one.
No, that's exactly what I was going to say.
Really?
Yeah, I was going to say kind of taking the Jacob Lishan approach is like, maybe like at daylight, you get into a spot and you sit for a couple hours, especially like that mid-October time period, kind of like what Andrew's talking about, like the compounding habitat edges, not necessarily just terrain features. Now, if you have a really good terrain feature, like, whether it's a saddle, it's a thermal, or really a thermal hub would be awesome, like, or a bowl, or you have a couple different terrains come together, and you have habitat edges all come together there. That would be really awesome, especially like on a morning sit. But just sitting until like 9 o'clock and then getting down and literally hiking yourself until you find something. But when you're hiking, focusing on those habitat edges, like don't focus on necessarily like wide open terrain features, but like focus on like the habitat edges. And especially the more habitat edges you have in one area, the higher likelihood you're probably going to have a lot more deer there. And also, did he specify whether he's trying to kill a buck or just any deer?
He just said deer.
Okay, well, yeah, just deer, awesome. Now, if you're trying to shoot a really good buck, God bless you. You can definitely do it. It's just you're gonna have a lot of boots on the ground, and it really comes down to like deer density. If it's a really high deer density area, it's gonna be a little bit easier to kind of find some of this stuff. If it's a
Yeah.
little bit lower deer density, you're gonna have to walk a lot more in order to try to find these locations that these deer are using. But yeah, I mean, I would sit in the morning, that first morning until 9 o'clock. If you're seeing movement, great. But again, I'd go in blind specifically on habitat edges.
Yeah.
Like just go in blind on habitat edges where you have two, at least two's okay, but really three or more habitat edges all come together. And then sit till like 9 o'clock. If nothing happens, get down and then start scouting habitat edges again,
Yeah.
where you have multiple edges all coming together throughout that thing,
Mhm.
and then kind of going from there. And then probably you're going to find something worth sitting on,
Mhm.
by mid afternoon, late afternoon, and then hopefully have an opportunity right at there, right at dusk.
Yeah, I agree. And for the rut, I don't know if I'd really change much about that.
He
For the rut.
didn't specify gun hunt was during the rut. He said this later in the season gun hunting.
Yes, he did. And for the and then you have one more day during the rut later in the season with a rifle.
Okay.
Bro,
Okay.
you don't listen.
I just heard later in the season, with a rifle, and I was like, some of these states have like a
Yeah.
little
I would
pushback.
I would do the same thing for the rut. Because like here's my thing. Like if you want to just boil it down, if you're in a situation where you don't have a lot of boots on the ground and you have to e-scout, I think compounding features are really like your saving grace in that situation.
Yeah.
And not being so concerned with just being in a tree, first thing in the morning. Like if I was going in for one day on a rut hunt, I would locate several compounding features, whether it be habitat, terrain, or both, ideally both. Where you got like three or more edges coming together, and maybe they're coming together right in a saddle or something, something like that. Uh, Ideally, have like a couple of those picked out. Get out there at daylight, walk into them, check them out, and just pack a lunch and hunt the rest of the day.
Yeah.
Like because here's the thing: if you literally have one day to hunt, and you're very limited on your time, you don't need to like leave and go get lunch. Like you need to hunt all day, whether you're in a tree all day or whether you're like walking around and scouting and
Yeah.
then moving around. Like don't waste any time going back to the truck and eating a biscuit and going to get a coffee or whatever. Like pack what you need and just maximize your time out there and stay out there the whole time. And even when you were working your old job where you were working like 65 hours a week, that's what you did. And you had a lot of success with it. You'd go to
Yeah.
Tennessee and you'd have like 1.5 days to hunt. Like you'd have all day Saturday and half of Sunday. And you would just stay in the woods all day Saturday.
Yeah. Dark to dark.
Yeah, dark to dark. And that worked out a lot for you. And that's worked out for me too. So I think that's the main thing is like just spend as much time as you can in the woods and but also the kind of like, flip side of that is don't be so concerned with getting in a tree that you just set up on the first thing.
Yes. That's another thing because like when you're under the gun like that and you have like a very very limited time. Like again, great examples like what you're talking about in this question. Like you have one day to hunt. Don't set up on the very first set of rubs or scrapes you find. Like you need to keep working until you find something that like in your gut feeling you're not settling for it, but like you'll have a gut feeling. And this kind of comes down to some more experience and like really a lot more failure. But like you have a gut feeling like this is everything I should be finding.
Yeah.
With the right habitat, right edge, there's bedding super close. And that's another thing is like I would hone in so much on bedding in this area. Like if you only have again a day to hunt, you better be so tight to that bedding with a good habitat edge there that if something moves at any point, you're gonna have an opportunity at least seeing or hearing that deer.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be, you could use like Jonathan Bones tactics from a couple weeks ago where he was talking about like during rifle season, he likes hunting hill country, a little more open woods, and he wants to get like those shot opportunities where he can get way downwind of a bedding thicket and just kind of like watch like whether it's terrain features, habitat edges, he can watch way up in there and kind of see when deer are kind of crossing through. and that can definitely work. And it's not a bad idea. I mean, if this is a place that has a lot of logging activity, anytime you can sit on a clear cut, there's always a good opportunity to kill a deer.
Mhm.
But taking that out of the equation, if there's not much logging activity, getting in an area that it's just in your gut. The signs there, the tracks are there, the trails are there. You don't necessarily have to find, I think, rubs and scrapes, but if you can find some specifically rubs in an area along with a lot of tracks and trails, you're probably going to have a pretty good opportunity for some cruising movement, especially as we're talking about more during the rut when you have a rifle in your hand.
Yeah, definitely. All right, we got time for one more. This is from our buddy Kyle Huffstetler. He said, I recently listened to episode 516 with Shane Parker, and man, it was a good one, but I got a few questions. There was a segment where he said you cannot access a west-facing hub from the west because you'll be chasing the deer up. I'm assuming this means if you're hunting, accessing them in the evening. He also said you cannot access an east-facing hub from the west because you'll be bumping deer down. Does this apply for the mornings before the thermals start pulling? Basically, you want your access to be from the direction that the thermals are rising or falling to be safe. I think I have a good understanding of it, but I bet I'm not the only one that would benefit from a little further breakdown of this topic. Thanks again, guys. For the west-facing hub one, that's actually flipped. He's talking about a morning hunt.
Yeah.
So if you're chasing the deer up, that means in the morning they're going to be going up into a west-facing thermal or a west-facing thermal hub, and you're basically going to be right behind them going in for a morning hunt.
Yep.
Versus in the evening, yeah, that's where that thermal switch will get you. But what are your thoughts on
Yeah,
that?
it's like you're walking in north crosswind, coming in from the north, coming in from the south.
Yeah.
Like try to come in, if it's a west-facing hub, try to come in from the north or south, depending on what your wind's doing. Because the thing is, thermals play a factor, but again, and we've seen this, and I've talked to Shane about this a lot too. If you have very high winds, and when I say very high winds, when you get over 10 mile an hour, okay, now we're not in Kansas or Oklahoma where they have high winds all the time. But if you're over 10 miles an hour, that wind's going to swirl a whole bunch. And, like, those bucks can still smell stuff down there, but it's not as consistent as, like, if it's lower, very light winds, under 4 or 5 miles an hour, or just light and variable conditions where it's just a pulling thermal going downhill, especially in the mornings. But it's to try to come in with the advantage of coming in crosswind or cross thermal, where you're coming up from the south or coming up from the north for a west or east-facing thermal hub.
Yep.
But, again, it's super challenging because as Shane said in that episode, I'll be honest, we recorded that episode I think at like 7:30 in the morning, Eastern time, which is an hour before we're from, and we had hunted real hard, and I had so much caffeine and nicotine in my body, dude. Be ready for that episode. I was sitting there and he kept saying that. I'm like, you need to repeat this again for me, like explain this again. But yeah, it's fairly simple. But like what he's seeing specifically in the mornings is those bucks are again coming up into that hub. So they're coming from like the mouth of the creek. Then as you go up into that hub, it starts splitting off. They're like working that up in the morning,
Yes.
catching all those thermals coming down.
Yep.
And then in the evening, they're like dropping off a point, cutting across it with the falling thermal, so they can smell everything farther up in that hub. So like you just need to pay attention to that. And he talks about like a really big buck he shot last year and just unfortunately wasn't able to recover it. Was doing exactly that. Like he was coming up in that hub, a western facing hub.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was western facing hub in the mornings. And Shane had to get on one of the ridge points just to the side of it where he can kind of like shoot down and shoot across. It was gun hunting, and kind of cover a couple of the different locations in that hub. And it was what he calls like a really killing wind. Like his wind is just off that deer as it's coming up. And his thermals are just off that deer as it's coming up into that hub.
Yep.
But I mean, he has tremendous success, and like if you see his trail cameras, I mean, a lot of them are in a lot of those kind of areas, and he gets a lot of bucks on camera, especially like right around daylight, coming through, checking scrapes in that hub, and kind of working up.
Yeah, and the place he used to hunt, man, some of the deer he had on camera, you would not believe some of the deer he had on camera. Where he used to hunt. But anyways, I don't have time to do another Q&A.
Yeah.
So we got 2 this week. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, we appreciate that. Appreciate everybody leaving us new reviews. We'll cover some new reviews on next week's breakdown episode. But we appreciate everybody going on Apple Podcasts and leaving us a 5-star written review. Absolutely love seeing these guys, especially if you do have success using something from the podcast. Definitely write a review too. We'd love to kind of see just kind of what's working for you, and maybe some future guests you might want to see on the podcast or different conversations you'd like to see on the podcast. And you can leave all that in the reviews itself. But appreciate everybody as well watching the podcast on YouTube. Y'all have been killing
Yeah.
Loving it, guys. Love seeing the response. Love seeing a lot of comments and also the view count going up as well on these YouTube versions of the podcast. So appreciate the support there, and just really appreciate you guys listening to the podcast and sharing the show. So we're gonna get out of here. I gotta get rolling to Arkansas, and Andrew's got
Yeah.
some other stuff he's got to get done. But again, appreciate y'all watching. Appreciate y'all listening, and we'll catch you back on the next episode of the Southern Outdoorsman podcast. By the way, we have more merch.
Go buy hats.
We have a lot of hats, guys. So you can Blaze Orange hats and a lot of other patch hats. Go check them out. Again, link down in the show notes as well. Go get you some Southern Outdoorsman merchandise and kill you a deer in one of those hats, man. It'd be awesome. But like I said, thank y'all for watching. Thank y'all for listening. And we'll catch you back on the next episode from the Southern Outdoorsman podcast. And remember, y'all stay Southern.